There's more than one way to tell a story, especially a story as important as the Christian story. This also applies to all of the stories that make up our sacred stories. Today we explore that plurality in a lectionary of my devising or revising, because I think there's danger in telling the same stories over and over again, no matter how beloved they are. Among our sacred trove of stories, there are two versions of the Daniel story. There are even more outside of the Christian canon. Now, one of those stories was preserved in Hebrew and became the mother text for the Protestant story in most of your Bibles. But the other text was preserved in Greek, and that became the story in the Bibles of Catholics and Anglicans. Today, our second lesson in canonical comes from that Greek story, and our first lesson comes from the Hebrew story. And when you put them together in that order, they actually tell the whole story all together. You see, the book of Daniel is a text of resistance. It is a cagey and strategic piece of resistance. It is actually an anti-imperial text disguised as an anti-imperial text. You see, empire doesn't mind the mocking of failed and fallen empires because it understands itself to be on top, and that mocking, that calumny, only reinforces its own sense of supremacy. So by all means, mock the past empires. So the cagey authors of Daniel disguise their critique of the lingering and failing Greek empire in a critique of the centuries-old Babylonian empire. They put that critique on the lips and on the pen of Daniel, who had his origins much, much longer ago, before the Babylonian Empire, before the Assyrian Empire, before the dynasties of Egypt, before even the founding of Israel. The character of Daniel was a beloved character. He was a figure of legend with new stories added to his canon in each generations. When I teach Daniel in my class, I use the unceasingly open canons of the DC Comics and Marvel Comics universes to explain how it is that new stories keep getting added to an old story. Today, I invite you to hear the story of Daniel and the three young people in the fire as subversive as it really is. In the first lesson, three young people have been taken captive by empire and forced to assimilate to its culture, made to wear its clothing, made to eat its food, made to speak its language, made to answer to names they gave them, names that stick even in the stories of their own people. The tentacles of empire reach deep, even into the hearts of people who are working to faithfully decolonize themselves. It matters that these are young people. You see, in the larger story of Daniel, they were taken as children to be assimilated so that they would love the empire that colonized their people more than they loved themselves, their people, and their history. Empires have always underestimated young people, whether it was civil rights protesters, dreamers, or high school gun reform activists. When our lesson begins, these young people were being enculturated in the worship of the empire and required to pray to gods of the empire at the cost of their subjugated, colonized lives. One of the lessons of this text is that empire is insatiable and rapacious. They were already speaking the language of the empire. They had already had their names changed from Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were already colonial subjects, but it wasn't enough. The empire wanted more of them, more of their souls. As long as there is a corner of your soul that is free, uncolonized, unconquered, unbought, and unbossed, the empire will by any means necessary seek to uproot that liberty and colonize the last vestige of your right mind, heart, and soul. African and Native Americans know this too well, as do people in every nation that have been colonized. In the face of the empire's ravenous desire for their abject and total submission, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah clung fast to the God of their foremothers and fathers, and rejected the empire's religion. I'm calling this sermon Strategies of Resistance, ours, not theirs, because they didn't really strategize. They just said no. No to the God of empire, no to its veneration and worship. They didn't negotiate, they didn't equivocate. Sometimes we just need to say no to the manifestations of empire in our world, no to the slaughter of school children, no to military-grade weaponry in the streets, no to families ripped apart by immigration assault troops, no to bad preaching, no to death-dealing theology, no to violence against women, no to bullying in the White House, no to bullying gay teens and trans teens to death, no to corruption in government, no to everything that stands against the life-giving love and liberty of God. No and hell no. The empire responded to their rejection of its attempt to colonize their minds, their spirits, their souls, and their ancestral religion with lethal rage. Empire covets good religion. It knows if it gets a toehold in pulpits and pews, seminaries and sanctuaries, texts and tweets, books and blogs, it can justify and sanctify hierarchy and disparity as the word and will of God. So the empire prepared to kill Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. It was to be a spectacle lynching. A spectacle lynching was when folk who considered themselves good white folk would make an event out of a lynching, bringing their sweethearts, wives, children, and a basket of goodies to nibble on while they watched the show. They'd often set their victims on fire, as Nebuchadnezzar planned to do in the text. They'd pose with their burning corpses and later cut off pieces of them to take home as souvenirs. Activist archivist James Allen collected 145 photos of spectacle lynchings in the United States, including here in Texas. The strategies of resistance required to outlaw lynchings lasted well into the 20th century, because sometimes resistance is an intergenerational struggle. But the most significant strategy of resistance employed by the three young people was to be willing to let the empire spill their blood. Sometimes resistance means being willing to die. Sometimes resistance means preparing to die. And sometimes resistance means dying. Sometimes it means rising from the dead. But I'm getting ahead of next week's story. We are not far from the 50th anniversary of the assassination and martyrdom of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He and many others in the civil rights movement resisted not just segregation, but white supremacy with their very lives. White supremacy is a colonizing force that transcends national borders and is every bit a manifestation of empire as any nation with imperial imagination and aspirations. The three young people in our lesson prepared to die in resistance to empire. The Hebrew text then moves quickly to a story of miraculous delivery, but not so fast. There's more to the story. The Greek story picks up where the Hebrew one drops off and fills in the gap. The young people responded to their impending extrajudicial killing with the songs of their ancestors. They sang to the God no empire could strip from them. They sang of God's faithfulness to their people. And as the empire's rage burned against them in literal and literary fire, they used the breath they thought would be their last to deny the empire power over them, power over their story, and over their song, because our songs and our stories are tools of resistance. Something happened when they refused to surrender their hearts and minds, songs and stories, prayers, poetry, and theology. Even if they had to lay their bodies down, God appeared in the midst of the resistance. The resistance writers used the book of Daniel to tell their people that the empire would not be defeated with the master's tools. They couldn't defeat it with military might. They couldn't defeat it with economic might. But if they kept their minds right and stayed on the God who delivered their ancestors, no empire would be able to destroy them, no matter what their political reality. In the words of the gospel, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Our words have power. That's why fascists burn books, ban films, silence scholars, censure artists, and assassinate prophets. They bully and sue, intimidate and obfuscate, and then they use their words to rewrite our songs, revise our histories, and stamp their image on our art and culture. And they lie. They lie about us, they lie about our culture, they lie about our history, they lie about God. And with their lies, they construct a God who is not God and expect us to bow down and worship it. But these young activists on the page and the older activists behind the pen have shown us how to resist. Do not let empire tell you who you are. Do not let the empire assimilate you into its culture. Do not let the empire tell you that your culture and your culinary practices are inferior. Don't let the empire clothe you, body or mind. Don't let the empire use your life to advertise its glory. Resistance is not futile, but it's costly. We follow one who resisted empire to the cost of his life, and we are called to do the same. How much more ought we be willing to put our lives on the line knowing the promise of resurrection than those young people, literal or literary, who were willing to go to death, a death from which they had no sure promise of escape. Amen.